Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by Aeros, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from First Eyes and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the Airt Studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Taming Disaster, Drones for Good. Well, it is December. We're getting ready to wrap up 2020, and we've been talking about it all year. It's been a hell of a year, but we're in the stretch right now. A couple more episodes left here on our first year. And a very special guest that I'm excited about bringing to the table tonight. This is a guy who, if you're doing mapping, disaster mapping, you've probably heard his name. And if you haven't, you are not at the top of your game here in the U.S. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gregory Crutsinger, the Director of Applied Research at GeoAcuity. Greg, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy you're here too, because I always have a really good time whenever you and I are together. Sometimes Scotch has been involved, but we won't talk about that today. But it always makes for a very interesting conversation. So, those who follow the podcast know that I always like to open by kind of asking the guest to walk us through how they got started in the unmanned systems industry and how you got to this point here today. So let's start right there. For the folks out there who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Walk us through how you got involved in drones and disasters and what you're doing right now, and then we'll dive into it a little bit further beyond that.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride in the industry. I didn't actually come from an aviation background. So my background's actually as a plant scientist. So I was on that traditional academic track. So I did a Ph.D. At the University of Tennessee, and then a postdoc at Berkeley. And then I got a tenure track faculty job at the University of British Columbia. And so I was running my own research group of graduate students and postdocs, mostly on plants and ecosystems and really the study of where plants live and how they interact with other, organisms in the world.
I can remember when you first told me that, I was like, wait, what? Like, here's this guy who's doing this public safety disaster mapping, and you're talking about plants. And I kind of did a double take, but it makes sense because that was really kind of the foundation of where a lot of this technology started in the industry, it seems like.
Yeah, so we've been interested in remote sensing of plants for a long time. So NASA has studied global patterns of productivity to think about everything from how much oxygen is in the earth to are crops going to fail in, East Africa. And so drones came along on the scene and they really, from kind of the 2010 to 14 or so, it was kind of DIY kits. And I started out using some of the early 3DR kits just for mapping some of the experiments. So I would plan out these different research trials of plants or trees, and they were different genetic varieties, or I planted them in different environments. And I was interested in how the plants change throughout the growing season. And often that's really tedious tests. So you're out there like measuring all these leaves and the height of trees and all these million different things. And I thought, well, if we can map this with a drone, then I could probably save on some costs of like field assistance and things like that. And it would be more repeatable, right? So there's a lot of error. People get tired in the field. So drones as a flying robot was something that I thought I was really excited about. And I went kind of full into really thinking about how do you use them. However, it was at the time that like you couldn't really use UAVs without a COA or a real in-depth project, getting your manned aircraft, a sports pilot's license.
What was this back in Section 333, or this was before that even?
I don't know. It was 2014, 2015 or so.
Yeah, 333.
And so that was something that that was a pretty complex process for just wanting to dabble in new technology.
Yeah.
But I saw how the technology was going to change science, basically. I saw that this is a new tool, this is going to be big, and we're going to be using these at scale. I thought it would be like we were 12 months out, but I think like it's taken a little bit longer for a lot of different reasons. We can talk about it. At the same time, I have it was at the birth of our daughter, and Canada gives you a pretty nice parental leave, and so I chose to actually use that to go to sunny California because it was the middle of rains in Vancouver, and we were like, why don't we go to California for a little while, and just like I can do the work that I'm doing, but let's just do it in the sunshine for the winter time. And so we moved back to the Bay Area where I did my postdoc in Berkeley. And that was the home of 3DR at the time. And
3DR, for those who aren't familiar, is 3D Robotics, one of the early U.S. company pioneers in unmanned systems at the smaller consumer scale.
And at the same time, it was academic friendly. They were dealing with open source autopilots and Pixelhawk and that kind of systems. And they really started that whole DIY movement at the time. So Chris Anderson was pivotal in DIY drones, and he was the CEO of 3DR. And I got just involved with that community just being in Berkeley. Then there was an opportunity to go in to really help schools and universities as part of a 3R employee. I joined them as the head of education and director of education for them.
So you basically said, so long, Canada, stay in California.
I did give up a tenure track job. That was a big step. I think I was not aware actually of how big of a step that a big of a move that was. I thought, oh, let's go to the startup world for a while. But I did give up a tremendous amount of just trajectory and momentum in, I had a research lab, I had grants, I had students, and I just gave all that up to join a startup, which I thought was exciting, but I think I didn't realize that the startup world it's different. It's a different world, and it's tumultuous. And I didn't realize how tumultuous, in particular, the unmanned systems industry would be over the next couple of years.
And this is about the same time that airware was really popping up in the Bay Area.
Yeah, airware, drone deploy. Lily was happening, if you remember Lily.
Oh, yeah.
AirDog was around. I mean, if you went across the highway to Cesar Chavez Park at the time, when it's one of the popular areas to fly, you would see all these different companies, all that. 3DR was just launching the Solo. I mean, there was a lot going on at the time. So I had that transition out of academia. I had to adopt more of the traditional business mindset, even though I was dealing with schools and universities. I had to think more like a company. And I also didn't really, I knew about drones, but I didn't really know the inner workings of thinking about the software side and autopilots and mission planning and a lot of the community that goes around it. I mean, I had barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's so complex, all the different layers you need to really start to understand to conduct air operations with unmanned aircraft systems. It's more than a lot of people expect.
And I realized one of the first cultural walls I hit, or one of the first walls I hit was the cultural. So you have these two different worlds, and you still do, of traditional aviation and then the startup world, and they were just vastly different cultures. Yep. And so I remember going to some of the AUVSI events and other events, and I'm like, who are these folks walking around in black suits and these giant aircraft? What are you talking about? This is not at all what I think of in terms of unmanned. You're talking about Reapers and Global Hawks and things like that. And that's couldn't be, I'm talking about flying iPhones,
Yep. It's classic, tech world startup versus established aviation, military industrial complex.
Totally.
I mean, the two intersections
and
colliding.
They're colliding and crashing into each other, and one's moving incredibly fast, and the other is pretty set in a mindset of how things should work. And we're still there. We're still having that kind of conflict, but we're coming closer together, I think, in terms of like where it needs to go, and at least the people that want to just go use the technology as part of a job, like we're there today, that you can go get a Part 107 and some insurance and be on your way. And if that's as far as you want to dive into it, like you can still get the majority of your work done.
So you were at 3DR, and
so I was at 3DR. So then 3DR happened to not do so well with the hardware front. Okay. And so there were giant layoffs during that time. And as they pivoted towards software, right? So they were moving more towards site scan and some of the products that they were developing and away from hardware. And fair enough, like that's understandable. I think it just happened really fast, you know, from 2015 into 2016. It was just like, we have this great product. It's going to be amazing. Oh, we just lost tens of millions of dollars, you know, trying to compete with DJI. Yep. At the same time, DJI, you know, it was that time when they released the Phantom 3 Pro right before Christmas at like $499. I mean, they were being really aggressive and innovating incredibly quickly. And I think they just blew everyone out of the water. And you started to see a lot of companies fold during that time. So I went over to Parrot. So Parrot had a San Francisco office, and it was at the time that they were launching the Sequoia camera. So it's a 4-band multispectral camera for plant mapping. And that was really leveraging my background in plants and understanding the science.
That's right in your wheelhouse right there.
Totally. So I went to Parrot, and I was working with great people in the San Francisco office. I got to go to France. I got to learn more about the portfolio of companies. So working with SenseFly and Pix4D. In fact, Pix4D was housed in the Parrot office in San Francisco during that time. It was a much smaller US team in the early days. And so I got to learn more about the integration between the hardware side and the software side, and thinking more internationally. Like it was an international company, and you could think more globally in terms of different rules and different types of technology and how it evolves and how it's applied. And so I was really excited about that job. And then Parrot lost a fortune as well, trying to compete with DJI, and came in and laid off the majority of the office, including me. And that was a bit of a shock, because I thought, like, hey, you guys are moving towards commercial. Like, I'm working in the commercial space. This is a commercial product. But at the end of the day, it just came down to like bottom lines.
And you're thinking, damn, Canada never sounded so good.
No, I was just thinking like, oh man, like this industry isn't like a sure bet.
That's not as stable as everyone was hoping at that point.
That's right. And it's like, you know, and it happened fast. Like it was like, you were at 3DR. I was at Parrot for around a year or so. Before they had their layoffs. And they're a publicly traded company. So you can look at their balance sheets and you can see like, look, they just needed to make their balance sheets work, and that's understandable. And so that was the decisions that they made. And I still have good relationships with Parrot today. And I miss going to Paris, as we all do right now.
Oui.
So, but I learned a lot. And again, I got to meet that portfolio of companies. And so during that time, of the layoffs, basically I knew Pix4D at the time, and I had the opportunity just a week later. They're like, why don't you just come back and work for Pix4D, thinking more about the agricultural space for the software side, the research side, and then academic side as well for Pix4D. So I went back to the same office like a week later.
That has to be weird.
Like, I'm back. Bonjour. So I think it was fine. It was fine. Again, like, it's not like I have hard feelings about it. It was more just like, this is how the industry is.
Yeah, like, no. And that's how tech is. I mean, the rise of the .coms in late 90s, early 2000s, same thing was going on. It happens in so many industries. What's really cool though is you're a PhD, but yet you're getting this fantastic education at some of the biggest name companies in the small UAS hardware and software side. And so it's almost like you're learning on top of your formal education and developing these amazing relationships.
Yeah, and making it applicable. So, in academia, like, you can do whatever you want, basically, as long as you can write a paper about it and get a grant about it. But in the business world, like, you can't. It's got to be a product. A product has a timeline. It needs to fit a customer, or it's not going to make money. Even if it's a brilliant idea, like, you can't really. The academic world is for research and development that can be applicable to just building knowledge for knowledge's sake. And that's not the same in the private sector. And it's a hard lesson for an academic at heart to learn, because you have to give up some of your brilliant ideas for the sake of what's going to make money,
It's funny. I was just watching the movie Driven, which is kind of a recap of John DeLorean, the famous GM designer of the Pontiac GTO, who went on to found DeLorean Motor Company and designed the DeLorean car, which was kind of his work of art that nobody really wanted. And just underscoring your point is, if you don't have a market for the product you're developing, willing to invest and buy and pay the price you need, it's not going to work. And so why do you think that happened a little bit so early on with the unmanned systems industry? Was it that the technology wasn't proven, the software, or people just didn't see the use cases? Like, what do you think the big inhibitor was there?
I think that it was competing with I think competing with the international market, and in particular, DJI is just outpaced and out innovated and outpriced anybody in the market, and that's it is really difficult to compete with. They own their own factories. They know the cost of your goods. They know the cost of their goods. And they have amazing technology and innovation, not just on the drone side, but the telemetry side. Being able to fly a $500 drone out, 5 kilometers, and still maintain a feed. Their cameras are incredible in terms of the imagery, and then they're getting better on the software side. So I think, it's going to be very difficult to compete with them, particularly in the consumer space, that there's just no competition really besides some,
Yeah, I mean, the price point of Chinese tech, used to be like, okay, well, it's cheap, but the quality's not there. But DJI reinvented that wheel in the unmanned systems industry, underscoring that, no, some really good tech can come at a really great price. And I think that caught everybody off guard.
And it's dependable and reliable, and it's, say what you can about all the, security issues and all those other things that I try and stay away from, but like, it works. And I've watched a lot of other drones fly away or crash, fall out of the sky. And I think when you have to get a job done, you need something that's reliable and dependable. And they're there for a lot of their products. Is it perfect? No, there's glitches and things.
Yeah, that's just where the industry's at. I want to get into what you're doing today with GeoAcuity, but before we go there, since we're on the subject, where are you seeing the unmanned systems industry right now? We've got this, Blue UAS initiative coming out of the Department of Defense here in the U.S. We see Skydio touting new technology, Parrot getting more aggressive with the Anafi USA. Where are you seeing on the hardware side kind of the strengths and weaknesses emerging? And do you think there's now an opportunity for other players to come in and really compete against DJI, or does DJI still have it locked down?
Yeah, so I'm really biased in the industry to like what captures really good data. Like, I don't care as much about just eyes in the sky, and I feel like what we're building right now is tools for eyes in the sky, a live feed, in particular for the public safety side. Like, who's buying hardware? The public safety side is buying hardware, and so that's where like the Blue UAS side, that went after the military market, and then now the public safety market. And to me, it's like, well, I get it, but like, I care about mapping and data, because I see that the people that are actually making money and using UAVs are surveyors and engineering firms and infrastructure inspection. And that's where the money's at, in my view, in terms of like big businesses that are ready, that equates to a dollar value or on their bottom line. And so I don't see these companies like, look at the vehicles coming out. They don't have mapping cameras. They don't have RTK. They're not using global shutters. They're not caring about the precision and the accuracy of the information as much, because they're going after, a public safety market they care about a live view, they care about a thermal view, they care about security features and things, but that's different than like, how do we reconstruct a 3D building and make sure it's accurate because we're going to build a bridge next to it or something like that.
That's that's a really great point. I mean, public safety wants a small, compact, portable, reliable package, but for surveying and mapping, I mean, that's not necessarily the case. It's like you want the right equipment.
Yeah, I mean, look at the thermal camera on a lot of these vehicles isn't even radiometric. It's just like red to black. It's not even like that's 92 degrees or whatever. And so even for infrastructure inspection, it's like, well, I need to actually know what the temperature is. I can't just say it's like hotter or colder. I need to know like what it is. And so I think it's just they're building for a different customer and a different market, and I get that. But I think look at where DJI is look at the M300 series. You have now a 45 megapixel camera with a global shutter on it. The P1 camera that came out, like that's competing with like phase one and some of these $100,000 cameras, and it's $9,000. Like that's crazy. And then they have a LiDAR that you can attach with a 20 megapixel global shutter on top of it. Like you're just getting to where these packages that they're creating are like so advanced it's not just the drone, it's the sensors and the integration, and then the telemetry, being able to send it out, 10 kilometers or whatever, is crazy. Yeah. You're light years ahead of where anyone else could be. So I think without government intervention or someone like Sony, right, putting like billions of dollars into it, I don't think you can catch them. I think you just have to differentiate and create a good market that's solid, and try and compete that way.
How about FLIR? I mean, we saw them purchase Arion Labs, and now they've acquired Altavian in Gainesville, Florida. I mean, do you see FLIR as having the potential to maybe go up and really bring some products to market that can compete head on against DJI?
I think, again, it's a world that I don't know, that defense world. And I think FLIR appears to be pretty heavily reliant on government contracts. And so I don't know, it's not a market that I understand. I think maybe they can compete, but I feel like an awful lot of folks are relying on legislating in innovation rather than just innovation for innovation's sake. Let's just push out the Chinese and because of security issues, which is fair enough. But at the same time, like, well, we can solve security issues. And if they solve it, is there still going to be fear mongering around it? Like, I don't know. You can't just you got to have good products too that meet specifications. You can't just say, you can't buy this. I was just on that federal workshop the other day. Look at USGS, like 80% of their work or 85% of their work is grounded because there's no drones out there that can meet the specifications that they need. But is the USGS a big enough market to build a product for? Probably not.
Yeah.
You need it. So I think it's complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Well, all right, let's change gears because I want
some disasters.
Yeah, let's talk about disasters.
Yeah.
So I think our path first crossed after you had started doing some of your initial work, and I'm not even going to pretend to remember all the names of the fires that you've been on, because I know when you live in California, you guys tend to remember the fires. Like in Florida, we remember the names of all the hurricanes, and people everywhere else they don't seem to really remember those names. So, but walk me through kind of how you made the transition then from Pix4D and started getting into mapping these fire scenes and disasters.
Sure. Yeah. So I was working at Pix4D, and then I went off on my own to form Scholar Farms at the time, which was a consultancy just really around vegetation mapping. And some of that had to do with my wife is an executive, and she too was taking a bigger role, and I just couldn't have the travel schedule and other schedule with events and things that I needed more flexibility to be at home. And I was happy to have her.
I do seem to remember you telling me about it, like a trip to Hawaii where you were sitting in a coffee field mapping, and I'm like, wow, he's doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, so like what I wanted to do was focus on what I knew best, which is like, how do we use drone technology for vegetation mapping, particularly in agriculture where there's money for it over, say, the academic space. And so I built online courses and curriculum around that. I did training workshops, and then I did some one-on-one consulting. And that lasted for the past 3 years or so before I joined GeoAcuity. But the day I started Scholar Farms was the same day as the Tubbs fire, which burned like 5,000 homes, including 3,500 right in Santa Rosa. And that was Coffee Park and some of those neighborhoods that are pretty well known here in California. And so Sonoma County like burned down the day I started Scholar Farms. And it was during that time I got a call from Alameda County Sheriff's Office, who I had met working for Pix.4D and done a little bit of just remote consulting during some of the Ghost Ship fire, which was a fire of a nightclub that burned down in Oakland, and about 30 young folks died in that one. And they were interested in mapping it at the time. So I had given some advice, and they knew that I knew about how to map and how to capture data. And so they asked me some advice about mapping some fatality sites from the Tubbs fire. I forget how many people were killed, but it was more than a dozen or so. And so I actually went up to the scene. I was like, well, why don't I just drive up and I can walk you guys through it. We can process locally and just know that you're capturing it pretty well. And so I drove up there. It was about an hour and a half from my house. We were mapping just a small area of a mobile home park. And then and this was actually the first time that UAVs could be used during an active wildfire. So the fire burned farther out into the county, into more rural areas. But we started driving around, and we went into Coffee Park, which just looked like a war zone, like a bomb went off. And I've never seen, even in all the 6 fires I worked on so far, like Coffee Park is by far, I mean, it's just an entire neighborhood full of houses that were just leveled overnight. And it was incredible and devastating. So we ended up moving on to mapping Coffee Park, and we could only map at 100 feet because that way we were capped from CAL FIRE and other aircraft.
Because of the water drops and the aircraft.
Yeah, and they were just like, you can fly drones, but you can only map at 100 feet. So
it takes a long time.
Forever.
Yeah.
There was so many photos. And it was like a couple of 100 acres.
You probably had really great resolution, but it just took forever.
It took forever. And this was just one heavily hit neighborhood, but they wanted to visualize some of the areas beyond some of the other neighborhoods that had gotten damaged. And that's when I started. I was friends with some folks that had moved on from 3D Artiform Hangar at the time. And I was like, well, why don't we do some 360s, and we can just do some panoramas of areas, and you can embed those in. And it's easier, and you can capture an area because we can't map it all. And so there were a couple of teams on scene, and they went out to some of the other broader areas and did some of the panoramas. And we were able to overlay all of those data together with some help from Pix.4D and some of the other companies, Mapbox in the area, and merge it all and then release it. So they made it public right before they were going to repopulate some of the neighborhoods so that people could know basically what their neighborhood was going to look like before they came back in. And that was the first time, and that was the county that made it public. It was like, okay, we handed all the data over. Okay, how do we release it?
And what year was this? 2017?
2017.
And this was your very first disaster fire mapping.
Totally. It was like I was basically taking a crayon and just like going street by street as we finished and just marking it out. And it was, it was just us piecing it together and trying to figure out, okay, here's the area we want to map. Here's the height we can map out. Here's the teams that we have and the drones that we have. Like, how do we do this? And it was basically, shooting from the hip.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you must have been learning. I mean, you were learning how to do this. You were kind of blazing the trail. And I mean, how many fires have you done now?
I've worked on 6 now, so
Okay.
five with multiple teams, and then we did one that was just for a private insurance.
And I mean, I know with hurricane response, we learn something new every storm that comes through. I mean, there's always a couple nuggets at least that we're like, oh, okay, there's a
Yeah,
new way to do
100%.
this.
And so, like, basically, we released the data. The data went public. The news media picked up a lot on it because it's super striking imagery, particularly of
Yeah,
Coffee Park. Really high resolution.
and it's innovative. It's never
Totally,
been
the
seen
Bay
before.
Area too. Like, you're doing robotics, but I mean, that was it. I went back to work and like started to do ag workshops and plant mapping courses and things until the next year. So the car fire hit Reading. There was about 1,200 homes or 1,000 to 1,200 homes that went up. And again, I got invited up with under Alameda County, who's really kind of led a lot of these operations.
Is that Tom Madigan?
Tom Madigan and his team. Yeah. So they've really been.
They've got a strong team.
They got a strong team, and they do a lot of training in the Bay Area and amazing work. But a lot of their work is really around live scenes and situational awareness. They're doing lots more mapping around crime scenes and accident scenes as well. So they're getting good at it. I think at the time it was mostly like, how do we coordinate all this data coming in? Like, I'm not flying the drone. I'm just like there with the teams. I'm tracking where have we been, where do we need to go, and then how do you process all that information and turn it around. In this case, it was for the city of Reading. Again, we mapped some hard hit areas. We did like 150 panoramas across broader areas. We compiled it and handed it over to Reading City GIS. They turned it around in 48 hours and released it to the public while people are still evacuated. And so it was like, again, media attention, but it was the people that were impacted are seeing data like turn around really quickly by public safety teams.
Had you trained with them before this, or it's just like every time there's a new fire, you kind of jump into the fire?
We've trained some, but I think like, again, a lot of it is like, it's not so much the priority, right? It's like, this is something we've done. Did we expect in 2017 to 2018 that this would continue to happen? No, Yeah. And so do I continue to think it's going to happen? Well, now I probably do, but I think we definitely have evolved into a scalable process that's like, okay, here's the process. You could drop me into any team, any 50 teams in the world, and it's just I'm a data funnel, and that's
and that I think I would argue is the weakest link right now. I mean, we're seeing public safety start to actively embrace, spinning up the teams, building their programs, but there still seems to be a rather large disconnect between the data collection side and the GIS side and what those end products are going to look like. And you kind of alluded to that earlier in the conversation, that right now it's really about live streaming and situational awareness. But the mapping part is really valuable for damage assessment, disaster assessment, even mitigation. I mean, I know you guys have been doing some cool stuff with fire breaks. So, I mean, where are you kind of seeing the evolution of this now 4 or 5 years into these fire scenes?
Yeah, I think that so let me finish 2018 and then we can kind of talk broadly about this.
Okay.
So that was July of 2018 or August of 2018. And I was like, I'm done. I went back to doing agricultural mapping and workshops and things like that until November of 2018. That was a campfire, right? And so now 18,000 homes and however many people were missing at the time.
And for those out there, campfire was really a game changer on a lot of this, right? Is that fair to say?
I think for everybody on the fire front, thinking about how dangerous these fires actually are on the federal and state and local management, all these agencies, it was crazy. And so in that case, we were asked to come up to map some of the harder hit areas, but it was all hard hit. Like it was the entire town of Paradise and Magalia And so what I thought was going to be mapping 1,000 acres ended up we mapped like 17,000 acres or something like that with phantoms. Like, it's crazy. It was just at a whole nother scale. And that was like 15 different teams from a bunch of different agencies going up and mapping over a period of a couple of days. And then we processed it all in the cloud. We had runners that ran the data back to San Francisco. Drone deployed batch uploaded it in the cloud for processing. They stayed up like all night and pooled it all together. And again, we turned it around in like 48 hours and it was public and released, and with hundreds of panoramas. And we had video from Survey, the company overlaid on all the streets. Like, we're pooling it all together. We have 2D maps with panorama point locations and video of major infrastructure all combined into one map and put out to the public, which is crazy. And that was just like that I think changed the game of like, okay, this is how you put these pieces together. It's the same drone, but it's really how do you integrate all of this information and then get it to the cloud into a website that people can look at.
Now, when you're doing a scene that large, like Campfire, is the drone really the right tool to use, or are you better off using manned aircraft with high-powered cameras, kind of like the GIC uses?
That is a great question, and I think that like you have to remember that visibility is super low. So manned aircraft, like you flying at 4,000 feet, you're not going to see anything.
Yeah,
because it's smoky.
And so a satellite's not going to see anything.
A satellite is not going to see anything. Yeah. That would be the other right tool at 30 centimeters now. I mean, you can cut through some of the smoke, but you're not going to be able to see at the property level. And then the airspace is super crowded.
Congested,
right?
Yeah.
So you have CAL FIREs in there. It's all under a TFR. And so the public agencies are getting waivers for the TFR and then coordinating the airspace safely. And then in this last fire this year, like even the manned aircraft weren't flying. Even CAL FIRE wasn't flying. It was too smoky. It's too low of visibility. And in this case, like flying a drone and getting a panorama, you can see, is it a great quality image? No, but it's better than nothing when you have tens of thousands of people evacuated.
Yeah. And it depends on what the wind's doing and weather conditions. And
so I think the answer is like, we need every tool. And if you can fly a helicopter and map thousands of acres, do it. But that's not the case in a lot of these fires. It is for hurricanes. You can get in a Cessna or something quickly afterwards and fly it safely. But you're talking about airdrop, all the airdrops and stuff take precedent over, and so you can fly a drone at 200 feet or whatever and be safely out of the way.
Well, and it's interesting because we see such a focus on drones and the mapping component now and the software that's coming out for mapping with drones. But in essence, it's really about just collecting the data, whether it's drone, aircraft, satellite, and then using software to stitch it together.
Merging it all together and then creating the layers and overlaying the streets and the property addresses and making it searchable, but not making it too complicated that you have to be a geospatial expert to interact with it. That's kind of the goal that I have now is like, okay, I don't care I do care that the pilots are professionals and can do things safely and know how to use the vehicles and the equipment, but it's basically like, how many acres do you need? How many teams do I have? And what data products do you want? And we can coordinate that on the ground and we can collect all the data. We can process it and put it to, typically you want it in ArcGIS so that counties, you can share it with counties and other agencies. And you want to overlay the right information that people are looking for, which is, where's my house and did it burn down?
Yeah, and what's really crazy to me is, I mean, for the first time ever, and I'm not exactly sure why this is, but if you look at the traditional model on how this work would be done, you would have let's say you've got an aircraft crew, but you also have a maintenance crew on the ground with a maintenance chief overseeing the aircraft. And so then the flight crew will go fly the mission, they come back, and then an imagery crew will take the imagery from the camera system, or maybe it's downloaded directly from the aircraft to them where they start processing it. And then, so you've got all these different teams of people basically working on the end product and making sure that the collection's done safely and accurately, and then that the data product is produced. It seems like in the world of drones, that the remote pilot is being asked to fill all of those gaps. And it's kind of unfair because the money's not there right now. The training's not there. And
I think the difference is this, is like, when it comes to disaster, it's like, if you want survey level data with professional accuracy, like, sure, you need a professional surveyor in there. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is just visualizing critical infrastructure and damage assessment. And that's okay if like it's off by a meter or so, like you're not building a bridge on it. Eventually you will rebuild the bridge.
But it's rapid damage assessment, and
it's just trying to get data out there in a way that's easily usable by as many stakeholders as possible. And now we're to the point where like you don't have to be. I'm not my PhD's in plant ecology. Like I'm not a GIS expert, but I know enough about photogrammetry and processing and the imagery and what format it needs to be to get to the GIS experts. My PhD advisor said, you need to know enough in like a programming language, or in this case, an image language, to like order a bagel in that language. And that's what we need drone pilots to do, is like, look, using a drone deploy app or some other mission, or Pix4D capture, or some other mission planning app, site scan, is really like, can I work an iPad? If you can fly a drone, you already know how to work DJI Go 4 or some other app to fly it. In this case, you're just programming it to collect the imagery. You know, you're flying a map. That takes an hour to learn.
Yeah, I think most remote pilots at this point are comfortable, at least they should be, certainly on the mission planning portion, if they're going to be mapping a grid. And it's really easy with the software that's out there now. Then taking the data off the SD card and uploading it to wherever it needs to go. I think that's the part that everybody's probably comfortable with. Where it gets a little trickier is then you've got people, okay, well, make me a map and this resolution and this file size. And
all that. That's where like, you need, that's where, so I joined GeoAcuity, which is a team of GIS professionals. That's part of what they do, not just damage assessment, but a lot of infrastructure and assets and a lot of management. And that's where you really have to just get it to the point where you can hand it off to a county or a state GIS person, or internally to your GIS person. But really, like, you go fly the drone, you collect the photos with the right overlap, and you can upload it to the cloud and it'll make a map. And then where you push that map to, you can kind of hand it over from there, hopefully. You have
Well, it also gets tricky under austere conditions like we experienced in Marsh Harbor, Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian, where there is no mobile connectivity. So we were processing, locally on Pix4D React. It's actually a beta version. And so that workflow hasn't really been established yet either. I mean, I think it's starting to get piecemeal together, but there's a lot of work that I feel that needs to be done here. Yeah,
I mean, part of the benefit that we've been able to use is I can drive to gigabit internet within an hour or two, and I can upload hundreds of gigs. In this most recent fire we were lucky enough to let Chico State University let us into their GIS lab to upload data for the county, and we had parallel 10 computers running at once, just uploading map layers.
Wow.
At the same time. And so in a couple of hours, we will upload, 150 gigs of photos. You can't do that in, super rural areas, even in the US, let alone Haiti or some other disaster that happens. So
yeah. With 5G coming, I mean, the promise is it's going to improve, but for a disaster scene, I mean, that's always been the weakest link for us. It's either streaming the video or getting files of high resolution data where they need to go. And even a lot of the companies we work with, a lot of the agencies we work with in a disaster scene don't want high resolution because they may be operating in a mobile command center with very limited bandwidth over mobile connectivity. And give me lower res stuff. So,
and I think that with the things I'm most excited about moving forward is like rapid processing. We're like real-time processing through Live Map or some of the other products that are out there where it's just processing in low resolution on your tablet in real time is there, or processing really quickly after the fact in Pix4D React or Pix4D Fields, where you can have a map in 7 to 8 minutes, which would have took hours before. We're there, at least in 2D. And then processing panoramas and other types of features offline, I think is getting much easier. And so I think we're there today where like we can generate the data layers. Now what? How do you organize them and make them in a way that's going to be easy to interact with? That's where the art comes in and the skill comes in to make what is complex very simple and tangible and easy to interact with. And we're still like a huge gap there. We reinvent what we do every single time. There's no real standards besides if you can get it into Esri or ArcGIS format, then you have pretty standard tools that you can use. And that's what we've done with our portfolio of maps that are out there. Every time we're just trying and say, okay, here's how we would do this, because we're kind of coming from a bottom-up approach. But if you look at any of our maps, it's really simple. It's like you can zoom, you can search for an address, you can click on a property, and the address will pop up. And you can turn on a few easy little layers, but it's nothing super complicated. And in fact, more recently, we've been doing YouTube videos that we release with our maps of like, it's me walking through the map so that you can know where I point and click. It's 7 minutes of video, and now you understand the map. You don't have to be a professional.
That's awesome. So we've got a couple minutes left. Really quick, I know you're the director of applied research now at GeoAcuity. Tell us a little bit more about GeoAcuity and how people can get more information on what you're doing over there.
Sure. So GeoAcuity is a full service geospatial firm. So we do a lot of different services, from collecting data on the ground, and that could be high resolution, precise location information. So we do a lot of assets and inventories. We also can fly drones. I don't typically during the disasters. I let the public safety teams fly, but we do fly, and we are professional pilots for image capture. And then we do a lot of database and GIS database management. So thinking about how do we manage, we have mostly government agencies, how do we manage their portals and inventories and assets? We're a small veteran-owned business, and so we do contract a lot with other big spatial firms as part of kind of those contracts. And so, but we do a full range of services. So I think for us, it's like, look, if you don't have to be a geospatial professional, you can hire small companies like us to come in and handle all the data. You could hand me off all the photos and I will make it pretty as long as you collected them correctly. Or we'll build the maps and the data layers for you, So I think those pieces are there. It's just, do agencies, is that what you want?
Yeah.
Like, is that what you want to do with it? Or do you want to just hand somebody a hard drive and say, here, we flew a bunch of UAVs.
Have at it.
Here's your 20,000 photos collected,
So the URL for GeoAcuity is geoacuity.com. Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
GeoAcuity, ACUITY.
All right. So 2 more questions. I got to ask really quick. What's it like being coming out of academia, Ph.D., and now you're working with all these law enforcement cops on a disaster scene? Is that a learning experience?
It's always a learning experience. I think that, I think I work really well with them, and I really appreciate that the work that they do, and it's so different than anything I would ever want to do or ever be capable of doing. One of the reasons I think we're successful is like, they're really good operationally, so they can like deploy and make it happen.
Yep.
And I'm not like a linear thinker, like my brain's all over the place and somehow I get it organized. But I'm a creative person. And so when things aren't working, I can do creative problem solving and tweak it and then hand it off, and they can operationalize it. And then they can also trust that they can hand me all the data and I can nerd out and do what nerds do, right? And so I think when we work together, that's where, like, as long as everybody's, I think we work together because it's the creative and it's the operational working together. And I have the technical side and they have the expertise of deployment. And also they can handle all the paperwork and getting the permissions and getting the access and things that, no private contractor is going to go into these airspaces. They want professional and public safety people in there.
You've got to have a legitimate reason to contact SOSG, FAA, and DC and say, hey, we need an SGI to fly this area.
Totally. And you're working in disaster zones, and it's not particularly safe. There's trees falling and it's smoky, and it's like, it's sketchy.
Not only that, it's like, people are like, after hurricanes, no gas, no lodging. You get a flat tire somewhere on the road, there's nobody to come change it for you. Totally. So you've got to be self-sufficient in so many ways.
So I think we work together. I also don't have a big ego. So like, I work together with ego people pretty, like if you're an alpha male or type of person, like I'm okay with that. Like that's okay. I'm not going to try and out alpha you. Like I'm just like so
it's not a pissing contest.
It's not. Okay. And I think like for me, that really works.
Yeah.
For other people, like, especially if that's kind of your background, like, how to interact with those people in a different sort of way.
I mean, you see that sometimes on the public safety side when different agencies that haven't worked together before are all of a sudden kind of thrown together. It's, kind of the alpha dogs circling each other to see who's going to dominate.
Like, because it's not a world that I even interact with on a daily basis. Like, look, I do disasters and we're really good at it, and I'm really good at the data side, but it's a really weird skill that I just fell into. It's not something I like went about seeking out,
Well, and it's also why, FEMA's got the incident command system and NIMS to create a model to manage these when the private sector and the public sector start working together on these types of projects. So last question, as we move hopefully out of 2020 in this whole COVID pandemic, and hopefully that breaks up at some point in the coming year, what are you seeing next year for 2021, especially in disasters and mapping and kind of your new wheelhouse? Anything big on the horizon that we should be looking at this point?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to happen in 2021, but I think where we're at now is like, look, the technology's there, the imaging capabilities are there, and the protocols and the data side are there. It's really, how do you operationalize it, and how do these big agencies, what I see is most people are just they're buying drones and they're building a drone program around eyes in the sky, and they want a live field of view, and they want situational awareness. They're not thinking about like, here are all the other tools that the same drone can use. How do we best build that in so that we can pay for data services along with drone flight services? And how do we build all the protocols and training, and so that you're qualified to do it? And I think the data side's getting left out. And it's going to be 5 to 10 more years before we really can do this cohesively. And the technology changes so fast that all the new tools that are coming out all the time, you got to be doing this stuff all the time and adapting and making it fluid. And I don't know how you do that. That's not my.
Yeah. It's tough when certain disasters like hurricanes, like wildfires seem to be so seasonal, and you're not doing it year round, which is why on the public safety side, hopefully they can find other applications to use mapping for traffic accident investigation, for fire mapping.
All that. And indoor versus outdoor. So I will say that's also the big thing is like, now we have I have an iPhone 12 here with a LiDAR on it, and there's all these indoor scanning apps coming out, including Pix4D. What's the new one? Pix4D Scan or something like that.
It's it just came out. It's for the LiDAR iPhone, iPad.
Yeah, you just hold it up and you can scan a whole indoor scene. And so I think integrate, like, that's on your phone. That's crazy. And so I think integrating that with the outdoor mapping, I think will be really interesting moving forward. And you'll start to think of a crime scene or something like that. You can scan it, and you can fly the drone outdoors, and you can merge those together. And now you can fly from the outside to the inside and take measurements and do all that. And we're ready to do that today, basically. So that's where I see it's headed.
And we are out of time, but I want to invite you back in 2021. Come back in a couple months, couple weeks, and let's pick up this conversation, because there's so much to talk about, and you've got so much experience and value that I think the community needs to hear. So does that sound good to you?
That sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. And folks can reach out to me. They can ping me on LinkedIn as well. Greg Crutsinger, I'm on LinkedIn. So.
All right. And that'll do it for another edition of Taming Disaster Drones for Good. Dr. Greg Crutsinger, Director of Applied Research, GeoAcuity, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Taming Disaster Drones for Good.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.